Alright everyone, I'm going to touch up on a few things that we haven't finished. So the first one is this assignment, the video review, 3 events that define the end of a millennium. So we looked at the Solidarity movement in Poland, and you have notes on that. That was the first one. We're going to look at these 2 events and take a few notes. So make sure you have this document in front of you. Those who missed the video on this, you need to come and watch the video Thursday during lunch. So you can make that up Thursday during lunch. That's track students and anybody else who missed it. So I'm going to cover this event real quick. Tiananmen Square, what happened in the People's Republic of China in 1979. And then we're going to move on to our next document. Okay, so I'm going to give you the very brief history of the People's Republic of China, Communist China, how it came to be before we get to the Tiananmen Square incident. So cross out number 1, strike through. And then make sure you know this, 1949, Mao, it looks Zedong, but it's pronounced Zaytun, becomes the leader of Communist China. So the revolution, China is now communist, going back in time, about the same time as Stalin's in power in the Soviet Union, and like we've said before, this scares the United States because it goes directly in the face of the containment policy. By the 1960s, Mao is still in control. However, the economy is in shambles. It's falling apart. His socialist ideas and government control over all business / commerce is said to have led to potentially somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 million deaths. So social ideas, forced labor, and executions of separatist groups who went against the communist system, millions of deaths, and a struggling economy. However, instead of taking a step back when Mao's challenged, he takes a step forward. He recruits students known as the Red Guard, a radical group of teenagers, and he leads a new revolution called the Cultural Revolution, which in China actually made things worse rather than made things better. They continued to try to promote socialist ideas, government maintained control, and Mao continued to grow his what's called his personality cult. So images of Mao are seen all over the country, just like images of Stalin. He's praised as the leader of this country and almost godlike. So fast forward, the Cultural Revolution is a drastic failure, and fast forward to the 1980s. So Mao dies in the early 1970s, and along with him dies his ideas, such as the Cultural Revolution. And by the time of the 1970s and 1980s, this man, he becomes the leader. And in June 1981, the Central Committee of the Communist Party announced the official verdict that Mao's ideas, the Cultural Revolution, which lasted from May 1966 to October 1976, was responsible for the most severe setback, heaviest losses suffered by the party, the state, and the people since the founding of the People's Republic. So they announced Mao's ideas as an absolute failure. So one adjective would be failure. You can come up with 2 more. By 1978, Deng is firmly in power, and he opens the doors of China to Western investment. What does this mean? He opens up to a market economy and ideas of free enterprise. Essentially, he makes a move towards capitalism, which hadn't been made in communist China for over 40 years. But he still believed in the Communist Party. Don't get that wrong. He doesn't believe in democracy or that the people should have power. Still firmly believes in the Communist Party. During the 1980s, 2 parties form. One, the conservatives, they want communism to remain exactly the same. They see these reforms that Deng is making They see these as wrong, going against the system. Reformers, they want to see change. They want even more move toward liberal ideas and some free market ideas. So Deng falls under this category. And things really come to a head in 1987 when students begin to express discontent with communism. So movements are going on around the world against communism in the 1980s, particularly because of the downfall of the economy. So the same thing which we see in 1989 in communist China, the People's Republic of China, is what we're going to study in a little bit in 1989 in the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc as states start to rebel. Alright, so timeline, rough timeline, this is what's going on. I'm going to tell you basically students become the leaders of this movement. Eventually 1.2 million people converge on Tiananmen Square, which is the central government location square of Shanghai and China. Martial law is declared, so the government comes down hard on it, and then we get to images such as the one that's on the cover of your work, such as this. So they begin hunger strikes, and we get famous images like this one, which became the image of Tiananmen Square massacre. As the tanks roll in and as the government comes in to regain control, the people are willing to stand up, but it becomes chaos when the government opens fire as people from all over China begin flooding in here, 1.2 million people. And eventually the people make their stand, but the communist government is able to regain control of the area, and eventually it's shut down. So a couple things in your notes. Why would Chinese students not know exactly what democracy was? What's interesting in the video, it talks about how these students want democracy, but they don't even know what it is. Well, education was controlled by the communists. Therefore, democracy was never even taught. Students knew they were fighting for something, but they didn't even know exactly what it was because they'd been controlled by the education system for so long. On May 15th, 1989, Soviet delegate shows up, which is particularly embarrassing for China because people might view this as they need help. They can't control their own nation. So tension had mounted, things have gotten worse, student hunger strikes, protests all over the country of China, and this state visit comes from Soviet Russia. At this point, there's 1.2 million people in the square. Martial law has been declared by the government, and troops enter the city from every direction. More townspeople continue to arrive. Troops begin shooting their way into the city. And on June 4th, 1989, 7,000 protesters peacefully leave. Troops now take control of the square, and they crush what students had built. It was called the Goddess of Democracy. They built this giant statue in the middle of the square, and the government, as a symbol of crushing the rebellion, crushes the Goddess of Democracy, and the really only major democratic uprising is crushed. So we're going to skip 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. The major importance: this is the first time a popular uprising challenged the popular Communist Party, and the same thing is happening across the world with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union. So what we're going to do for this